sand dunes with no infrastructure, very limited availability to provide services, protect families.
On Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken criticized Israel after Tel Aviv accepts the responsibility for killing an American during protests in the West Bank. As for ceasefire negotiations, Israel's defense minister says, quote, "The window is closing on an opportunity to reach a deal." I'm Sharon Tazwell. Our coverage of the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is coming up after this short break. Stay with us.
I'm Errol Lewis, and you are watching Spectrum's simulcast coverage of the ABC News presidential debate. It's 5:45 on the West Coast, 8:45 in Philadelphia. That's where Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump will soon be squaring off in the first and possibly only debate between the two candidates before Election Day, which is 8 weeks from tonight. Tonight will also be the first time ever that Trump and Harris will meet face-to-face. We also haven't seen candidates shake hands at a debate since Trump and Hillary Clinton's first debate back in 2016. Now, as we know, the last presidential debate changed the entire dynamic of the 2024 race for the White House and the momentum as well. It's an extremely tight race right now between Trump and Harris. The polls show them neck and neck. Let's start off in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center and check in with our national political reporter, Taylor Popolars. Taylor, remind our viewers of the rules for tonight's debate.
Good to be with you, Errol. So the debate is actually happening about a 15-minute walk from us at the National Constitution Center here in Philadelphia. The spin room is in part separated because there won't be an audience in this debate. The rules are pretty similar to the debate we saw back in June between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. ABC is the host this time. It will be 90 minutes in length. There will be a couple commercial breaks in between. No live audience, as I mentioned, just the candidates and the two moderators. Muted microphones will once again be playing a role when it's not Kamala Harris's turn to speak or not Donald Trump's turn to speak. Their mic will be off, and they won't be able to cut the other off. They're also not allowed to bring props or pre-written notes onto the stage, and while there won't be opening statements, they will each get 2-minute closing statements.
Okay, and Taylor, you also covered the Trump campaign for Spectrum News. What do we know about how the former president has been preparing for tonight's debate?
So he's been preparing in the way that he's prepared for all the other general election presidential debates he's been a part of. This is actually his 7th, which is a modern-day record. He does not sit for formal debate prep. He doesn't engage in mock debates where somebody plays the role of his opponent. He instead meets with advisors and allies, current members of Congress, former members of Congress. He spitballs with them in terms of ideas, what policies he wants to talk about, what attack lines he might want to use. We were on a press call with his advisors yesterday, and they told us that we should expect to see the same Donald Trump that we've seen in all the previous debates, that his tone is not going to be any different, that he is not shifting his strategy that much after running against President Joe Biden for so long and now facing Vice President Harris. And I think something to watch will be how he handles Harris because she is a woman. Back when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, he attacked her and went after her in a very different way as compared to when he has run against men. So that's something his advisors and the Harris campaign will be watching closely. But the Trump campaign told us they're feeling confident. One of his advisors said you can't really prepare to debate Donald Trump because of how sporadic he could be in these settings. So even though the microphones will be muted, they still expect him to be the showman that we've come to know over the last 9 years.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Cassie Semien covers the Harris campaign for Spectrum News. Cassie, how has the vice president been preparing? This is her first debate since 2020 when she squared off against then Vice President Mike Pence.
Well, her campaign knew in some form that she would be on a debate stage this year, previously thought to be the vice presidential debate against J.D. Vance, except now with her as the nominee, they had to change course a little bit on how they were going to prepare the candidate. She has hunkered down in Pennsylvania over the last several days to work on her debate prep. She's been doing mock debates with a stand-in for Trump. We know that person is Felipe Rines. He is someone who is a former aide to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. he was the person who stood in when she was doing her mock debate prep against Trump in 2016. So this is someone who knows how to emulate Trump, how to try and get under the person's skin. That was the kind of preparation that her campaign really wanted to make sure she was prepared for. Hillary Clinton herself has given Harris some advice, both publicly and privately. We understand the two spoke at some point over the last several days. Clinton is advising her not to let Trump bait her, but to bait Trump instead. I've spoken to a lot of experts who expect Trump to go after her race and gender. A lot of them say, she can't take that bait. She needs to take the high road. She needs to focus on the policy. There was also a lot of message training. We're talking about some really dense policy that she's had to roll out over the last several weeks when it comes to the economy and other priorities if she were to be elected president. Well, they only get 2 minutes to answer the questions from the moderators tonight. So really looking for succinct answers, practicing her policy and how to get it into that narrow time frame to reach the American public. The Democratic base and the Republican base have already made up their mind. It's the independent voters that both Harris and Trump are trying to reach tonight, Errol.
All right. Thank you for that, Cassie. Let's check in with our panel of Spectrum News political experts to see what they will be watching for tonight. Let's start with anchor-in-chief national political reporter Josh Robin, who's here on set with me. What will you be watching for?
Two things I was thinking about. First is the moderators. We haven't talked about them. There are 4 people who are going to be on that set tonight. What is ABC News going to do, if anything, differently than CNN did during the last debate when it comes to fact-checking? Obviously, the takeaway from the last debate was that Joe Biden melted down. But there were a lot of untruths that were given by the former president that really went unchecked. So I'd be curious to see whether the moderators are going to do anything differently than the moderators from CNN. Number 2, and you mentioned this, is the handshake. I'm of an age where I remember that even really bitter rivals shook hands before. That didn't happen during 2020 because of COVID. It didn't happen in 2024, I think, just because of enmity or how the stage was set up. I'd be curious to see if there is going to be a handshake tonight. Now, there are some problems for both of them. Number 1, just visually, Donald Trump is a lot taller than Kamala Harris. Would that be something that Harris wants to avoid? But Donald Trump is a lot older than Kamala Harris. Would that be something that Trump wants to avoid? But it really speaks, I think, to a larger issue of the civility in our time. So the handshake.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot for that, Josh. Holly Gregory is in St. Petersburg, Florida. Holly, what will you be looking for in tonight's debate?
Errol, I'm going to be watching to see which candidate makes the best case that they are the candidate to bring change. Because this is a change election. If there is one thing over the last many months that voters have made crystal clear in poll after poll is that they're not happy with the status quo. They are not happy, number 1, with the economy. Inflation has had a deep impact on working families, continues to do so. They're not happy with the impacts of illegal immigration directly in their communities, and they're worried about global conflicts. They want change. Now, Trump recently had some good news on this front from the Times Siena poll that showed 53% of voters view him as the change agent. But I think that the vice president has a real opportunity tonight to set herself apart, aside from the Biden administration, for her to make the case now directly to voters on where she really stands. Keep in mind, she did not have to be tested in a primary. She has not had a single news conference. She needs to explain to voters her evolution on a great deal many topics that they care about, and she has a chance to do that tonight. Trump, on the other hand, needs to stick to policy and not personality, and he needs to make the case, even if you don't like me, particularly women, who he's struggling with right now, even if you don't like me personally, if you are better off under me, then you have to vote for me. And he has to be able to make that case in a way that is respectful, in a way that he doesn't get triggered and do something that reminds voters in a viral way, and you see it over and over again on social media, particularly women, again, where he's struggling, why they don't think he has the personality and the temperament to be president in the first place. So he's got to make the case in a very respectful, policy-driven way.
Okay. Tim Boyum is in the battleground state of North Carolina. What will you be watching for tonight?
Yeah, Errol, two words: discipline and difference. On the discipline front, Republicans I've talked to in North Carolina and beyond are desperate for Donald Trump tonight to focus on what Holly was talking there about issues, immigration, the economy. They believe if he sticks to that he can win on those issues and avoid the sort of confrontations, even though the mics are muted, the interaction between back and forth. And they believe if he can't stick to the discipline, that this might be the last sort of seminal moment in this campaign where all of Americans' eyes are on these two at once, and that can make a huge difference. Speaking of difference, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump's going to go after her for just 4 more years of the Biden-Harris administration. So how is she going to respect and support what they've already done, but also differentiate herself from Joe Biden and perhaps roll out some more of this policy that Americans are still waiting to hear in a lot of ways from her?
Okay. Alex Cohen is in El Segundo, California, and has covered Kamala Harris for many, many years. This is the big one. What will you be watching for tonight?
I will be watching for all sorts of things, especially, as Cassie mentioned earlier, the questions of race and gender. How much will Donald Trump be bringing it up, and how will Kamala Harris respond? And I think it'll be interesting to see how she learns from the history of folks like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, as folks may or may not recall, really made gender one of the key points of her campaign, repeatedly talking about breaking that glass ceiling, and it may or may not have done her some harm in the end. And we've seen all along Kamala Harris kind of deflects when it comes to those questions. And I think especially as a woman of color, really faces some strong stereotypes about what happens when you talk especially about a woman fighting back against a person like Donald Trump. She was asked, I know that Holly mentioned earlier, some have said she hasn't done a lot of press. I would push back and say maybe she hasn't done traditional press. She called into a radio show earlier this week, and when asked, what do you do when Donald Trump attacks you, she said, same old tired playbook. And I have a feeling same old tired playbook may be a phrase that should be on everyone's bingo cards tonight. That might be the response she takes to Donald Trump.
And Alex, you've seen Kamala Harris in California politics when she's run for district attorney and for state attorney general and for U.S. Senate, and she's been in quite a number of debates along the way. What kind of reputation does she have as a debater?
That's a great question, Errol. And, don't forget, of course, she was a prosecutor. She's very used to making those speeches, being on the attack. But I think this is really an opportunity to show, we saw some of the most recent polling saying that a lot of Americans, first of all, don't know her all that well. They're looking to tonight to find out more. And a lot of voters think of her as being very progressive, very liberal, probably in no small part because she hails from California, which has that reputation. But if you actually go back and look at her track record here as our state attorney general, as a district attorney for San Francisco, she's way more middle of the road than a lot of folks might think. And I think tonight could really be an opportunity for her to kind of set the record straight. And certainly, one last thing I'll say, she also kind of enjoys being the underdog. Some of the earliest races that she threw herself into as a candidate here, all the polls were stacked against her, and it looked like she had absolutely no chance of winning. And I think she's one of those candidates that kind of relishes that challenge and would much rather strive to go higher and buck the conventional wisdom than to be sitting prettily on top just trying to maintain that success.
Very interesting insight. Jason Fechner is in Milwaukee. The battleground state of Wisconsin is a must-win state for both candidates, really. What will you be watching for tonight?
Errol, great to see, and kind of what Alex had said there, 28% of people in that New York Times Siena poll over the weekend said that they need to know more about Kamala Harris. So can she have that wonderful debate tonight, because we're kind of short on opportunities for these candidates to differentiate themselves from each other going forward? Just 9% of people said that they need to know more about Donald Trump, of course, a very known quantity. And something the campaign had told Taylor as well about you can expect what you can always expect from Trump in a debate. I would argue that that last debate with President Joe Biden, he showed a really good quality about staying restrained, and that might have been the campaign rules and the debate rules around him at that point. So I'm watching to see if Harris can kind of get him on his heels a bit and kind of get him out of that comfort zone so he's unable to show restraint and kind of break out of that box a little bit. Corey Lewandowski, of course, back with the campaign. A fascinating night to watch ahead.
Yeah, and Jason, to the extent that both candidates, Kamala Harris in particular, because she used to live in Wisconsin, are trying to appeal to Wisconsin voters. What will the voters there be looking for?
Well, obviously, the undecided independent voter in a battleground state like here in Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania, it's down to like the single digits at this point. And just how many are watching the debate, because viewership live during a presidential debate down about 31% over the past 4 years. So it's also avoiding those gaffes that go viral on social media. Both Trump and Harris will work to kind of avoid those moments, look to have those positive moments during the live debate portion. Those don't go as viral in our day and age right now. So it's avoiding those gaps for both of them. It's getting to that independent, undecided voter in those battleground states. And obviously, less than 60 days to go. It's now a sprint.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Jason. That is, in fact, what I think a lot of people are going to be watching for. I, in particular, will also be watching for how this plays in the handful of swing states. And we're talking about Wisconsin, we're talking about Pennsylvania, we're talking about Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Florida. These are all places where the candidates are fighting very, very hard for even the smallest advantage. And so they'll be talking to people outside of the actual debate room. They'll be trying to reach audiences in all of those areas. We're going to check back in with you all after the debate. Time now for the ABC News presidential debate simulcast on Spectrum News.
Between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Their first face-to-face meeting in this presidential election, their first face-to-face meeting ever.
A historic race for president upended just weeks ago. President Biden withdrawing after his last debate. Donald Trump now up against a new opponent.
The candidates separated by the smallest of margins, essentially tied in the polls nationally and in the key battlegrounds, including right here in Pennsylvania, all still very much in play. The ABC News presidential debate starts right now.
This is an ABC News special, the most